Hey guys, it's Mr. Spitzer. I'm back for another video. And this one we're going to break down the end of the Civil War, basically from about 1862-ish, end of 62 to 63, and in through 64 and 65 until we get to Appomattox and Lee surrenders. So what I have up on the screen first here is Battle of Gettysburg, and it's a huge turning point in the Civil War. So to set this up, prior to this, when you guys were doing the second module, which was start of the war, 1861, you guys talked about Antietam, the battles there. You saw a little bit about Perryville, which was the battle in the west in Kentucky here. After that, you went on to Fredericksburg, and then finally Chancellorsville, which were all huge battles. But in each one, um, Lee's army survived or either won, and so the war continued. And each one of those, the Confederate Army and the Union Army both had time to recoup their losses, essentially. Um, After we get through Gettysburg, that's all going to change a little bit. So let's get it started with a little bit of Gettysburg. So this is the largest and bloodiest battle of the Civil War. It's 3 days long. Um, in the battle, there's more than 51,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. And it's a super important victory for the Union because it stopped Lee's invasion of the North, and it's the furthest invasion of the North. They invaded when they invaded at Antietam, but that's only in Maryland. This is well into Pennsylvania. So this is a much more critical point for the Union to stop the Confederates' advance. So that's the basic overviews of Gettysburg. We're going to go a little bit deeper into Gettysburg here in a minute. So there's 3 days. First day, Lee's forces are gathering toward Gettysburg. The reason they ended up going to Gettysburg is they were looking for shoes. If you ever see any pictures of the Civil War, basically Confederates are usually seen shoeless when they're marching, and a lot of their soldiers didn't have shoes. So they were going to Gettysburg to get shoes because there was a shoe factory there. They ran into Union forces just outside of Gettysburg, and basically by accident, the battle starts. Lee didn't want to fight there. The Union didn't want to fight there, but they kind of blundered into each other. What ends up happening is some Union cavalry sets up to the west of the town. The Confederates attack them all day. They finally break the line. The Union ended up retreating back through the town of Gettysburg to the hills to the east of there. And so that's what happens. Let's take a look at what's going on. So this is a battle map of the first day of Gettysburg. And everything's going on here to the north and to the west of the town of Gettysburg. What's going on here is here on McPherson's Ridge and by the seminary, the Union cavalry sets up, and then they're reinforced by General Reynolds and I believe it's the 11th Corps. And A.P. Hill's Corps attacks them all day. Finally, Ewell's Corps attacks coming down from the town of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And they break the Union line here to the north and west of Gettysburg. The Union retreats back through the town of Gettysburg and sets up down here on Cemetery Hill. They're going to create a defensive line anchored on Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and running down Cemetery Ridge. But the first day, that's what ends up happening, and that's what things look like here. So going back to our presentation. Second day, Lee wakes up and the Union's still there, and so they decide to attack. And they attack what's called Little Round Top, which is a hill down to the south of the town of Gettysburg. Both sides, the fighting doesn't really get going until the afternoon because it takes a long time to get to where they need to be. They fight each other all afternoon. Union holds off the Confederates. Let's take a look at day 2. So what we got here is day 2. And again, so they're back here on Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, and down Cemetery Ridge. And down here are 2 hills called Little Round Top and Big Round Top. Lee decides to attack here to try and turn the left flank of the Union. They fight all day through areas called the Wheat Field, Peach Orchard, Devil's Den, Little Round Top. If you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, a big part of the movie focuses on this day and especially the defense of Little Round Top. So the Union's up there. The Confederates charge it several times. In the movie, you'll see the 20th Maine, and they will hold out on Little Round Top and basically prevent the flank from the Union being turned. Joshua Chamberlain's the commander of the 20th Maine. The movie does a great job of it. So, hey, guys, watch the movie. It's an awesome movie. And it's pretty historically accurate. There's a couple of little twerks about it that aren't so accurate, but it's pretty much true to form here. It's a really good view of what goes on at Gettysburg. So that's day 2. He sends 15,000 men under General George Pickett to attack the center. It's called Pickett's Charge, and it fails. Here is day 2. We should try and get a little bit bigger, better map of that, but it's all I have. Basically, Lee sends 16,000 guys to attack uphill across an open field to attack the strongest part of the Union line. It almost succeeds. I know that sounds crazy, but it almost works. But in the end, they do take a little bit of ground. They get turned back by a counterattack. And with that, the Battle of Gettysburg ends. Again, the movie Gettysburg does a really good job of showing this battle, especially this charge. You got time, watch it. I know it's a really long movie, but it's a great movie. So go ahead and watch that if you get a chance. With that, Lee starts to retreat back to Virginia. The aftermath of Gettysburg. And here's why Gettysburg is such a turning point. Confederates had 28,000 casualties. That's basically a third of their force. Immediately after that, the town of Vicksburg falls, which is the last Confederate-held city on the Mississippi River. And after Gettysburg, Lee is going to be constantly fighting through 1864, so he never gets a chance to recoup the losses that he had inflicted on him at Gettysburg. Always before this, there had been a couple of 2, 3, 4 months before the next battle. That's not going to happen here. After Gettysburg, General Grant's going to take command, and he will constantly attack. The other important part about Gettysburg is Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. Basically, a dedicated battlefield, and it was talking about the bravery and why winning the war was so important. I don't have a copy of it. If you want to look it up, it's a really good speech. And actually, Lincoln wrote it on the train on a piece of paper as he was going to Gettysburg. So it's one of the speeches he wrote himself. It's pretty good. After that, we move on to 1864, and this is where the pressure starts to build on the Confederates. Grant takes command. He attacks at the Wilderness. He loses, but he keeps moving. Prior to this, when a Union army would lose, they would retreat back, rebuild, and come at him again. Grant decides not to do that. He might lose, but he's going to keep attacking. He will never let the pressure get off of the Confederate Army and General Lee. So what it does is it stretches the Southern resources to the breaking point. So they can't resupply the troops. They can't get reinforcements. And it just basically pushes Lee to a breaking point. At the same time, in the western part of the country, or at least the western part of the Civil War, General Sherman decides to march through the state of Georgia. Now, the reason that this is so huge, and by the way, if you go to Georgia and you mention the name William Tecumseh Sherman, even to this day, he ain't a real popular person. So don't go down there and tell him you're related to him. They won't like you. What he does, he takes 100,000 troops, marches from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. In a 60-mile wide path, he basically destroys everything. Any Confederate troops, civilians, anything that could be used to help the South, he attacks and takes. So that's what that is. Here a second, we're going to pause. And we're back. And after that, Lee moves on and he gets to Petersburg, where he is surrounded by Grant. There's a siege that goes on. It lasts for about 8 to 9 months. Eventually, Grant breaks through. Lee retreats, starts to try to head south to meet up with Joseph Johnson and another Confederate army. He gets cut off and surrounded at Appomattox Courthouse and surrenders April 9th, 1865. The reason Lee surrenders, he has no options. He's out of options. If he fights, he's going to lose. He's surrounded. He can't get through Grant's troops. So what happens is he ends up surrendering, and that effectively ends the war. And that basically breaks down the effects of the war. 620,000 Americans killed. The majority of the South is devastated. The Southern economy is in ruins. And it gets a little crazy after that. So basically that is the end of the war. The reasons the South loses, they get pushed where their resources are stretched too thin, and they can't survive anymore. So that is the Civil War and the end of it in about 15 minutes. If you get any questions, let me know. I'll talk to you guys again in another video.